Hi everyone, and welcome back. Today we're going to go over eClass 2 for Module 2. Before you do this class, make sure you've done eClass 1 and the special topic eClass. To start, we've got an overview of what we'll be discussing in today's eClass. This includes the learning objectives for this class, a review question covering material from last week, the reading review for Chapter 2, discussion of social work's roots and development, and a discussion of social work's knowledge base. So by the end of this class, I hope that you'll be able to explain how social work's historical roots inform practice today, and be able to explain how social workers use theories in practice. Before we go into the material for this week, I want you to take a minute and complete this review question to help you remind you and refresh material from last week. So of the following, who is the least likely prepared for becoming an effective social work professional? Is it A, someone who approaches situations with hope, B, someone who approaches others with humility, C, someone who wants to do for others, and D, someone who is genuine? So write down your answer, and when you're ready, go on to the next slide. If you selected C, that's the correct answer. So as social workers, we really work with people and collaborate with people. We don't want to just do things for them. We want to be in a relationship where we can build ideas and problem solve together. Okay, these are some of the key terms and ideas that you should be familiar with from Chapter 2. This includes charity organization societies, settlement houses, the dual perspective, Flexner's assessment, NASW and CSWE, and what we mean by theoretical constructs and practice models. Now, some of this we're going to go over in more detail in this class session, but if you're not familiar with these terms at the end of this class session, make sure you go back and read these key things again and maybe watch this presentation again. Now, while social work hasn't been around as a profession as long as such fields as medicine, we do have a strong history that's really rooted in two movements, the charity organization societies and the settlement house movement. And in the half century after the Civil War, rapid industrial expansion produced a dramatic increase in individual and community needs. And earlier social workers, our forefathers and foremothers, developed two kind of strategies or two approaches to dealing with the changing economic and social realities. These are the charity organization societies and the settlement house movement. The charity organization societies, first developed in 1877, really derived their concepts and their orientation from business and industry, and tried to regulate public relief distribution through so-called scientific charity. Our charity organization societies largely focused on working with individuals and families. And as the charitable organization society developed, it increasingly focused on casework with individuals and families, and developed subspecialties in the areas of medicine, psychiatry, and school social work. And settlement houses reflected a different type of organizational response to the impact of industrialization and immigration, and introduced an alternative model of a social service delivery form in an urban context. The first settlement houses in the Neighborhood Guild of New York was established in 1886, and probably the most famous settlement house was developed by Jane Addams and Ellen Gates, known as Hull House in Chicago. And unlike the individually oriented COS, charitable organization societies, settlement houses, settlements really focused on the environmental causes of poverty and looked to expand working opportunities for the poor. They conducted research, helped establish the juvenile court system, created widows' pension programs, and promoted legislation prohibiting child labor. And they also introduced public health reforms and the concept of social insurance. Now, this isn't to say that charity organization societies weren't interested in things beyond the individuals. In fact, Mary Richmond, really one of our the founders of the charity organization society movement, believed it was important to look at social and environmental factors, as well as the community context that really shaped an individual's situation. And so in social work, we sometimes pit the charity organization societies and settlement house movements against each other, suggesting that they were two totally separate, unrelated ideas and approaches to social work. However, both kind of the founders, Mary Richmond and Jane Addams, really believed in looking at this kind of person and environment approach. And so the real difference was in kind of how they approach their practice. So Mary Richmond and the charity organization societies tended to kind of focus more on the micro level and move up to the meso, the communities, and the macro. The settlement houses tended to look more at the environmental context and how that was affecting individuals. And we can really see this idea of both taking a micro approach and scaling up and a macro approach and drilling down as being key aspects of social work. And Bertha Reynolds was really one of the first individuals who really talked about this kind of dual perspective, the idea that social work should be both and, not either or. So that, in other words, we shouldn't just be micro social workers, or we shouldn't just be focused on macro issues. They're connected, and as social workers, we have to be able to work at both levels and understand how each of these impacts the other. And so you'll see as we talk more about generalist practice, which is really this idea of being able to work at all levels, understanding how theories apply at the micro level, meso level, and macro level. Understanding social work interventions that are designed to target and help individuals and families. Interventions that work at the meso level with family, with groups and small communities, or at the macro level with organizations, communities, and federal level policies. So one of the ways that I like to think about this idea of the dual approach and generalist practice, working both at the micro level and at the macro level, is to think of the metaphor or the story of the river, right? And so imagine that you're a social worker and you're there with some other social work colleagues and some friends from nursing, public health, things like that. Right? And so you're at the base of this river with a high waterfall. And at the bottom of the waterfall, hundreds of people, all of you guys are working frantically to save those who have fallen into the river. They've come down the waterfall, and many of them are in distress. And so all of you are working to get them out, take care of their medical needs, help them process what happened. Well, as social workers, you're working with these individuals as they come out of the river, as you guys pull them out. But as a social worker, you're also going to say to yourself, wait, why do these people keep coming down the river? Why do they keep coming over this waterfall? Maybe I need to go upstream and see what the issue is. What is the environmental context? What is the situation that's causing these individuals to be in such distress, to be coming down this waterfall? And so as a social worker, you'll go upstream and you might notice that bridges in various states are in various states of disrepair on the river, and that individuals have fallen off of this bridge. And so you may say, okay, well, now that we know what's causing this situation, what's causing these people to be in distress, I can now work with the local community to fix this situation. So that's really kind of thinking about it. I know it's a simplistic metaphor and simplistic story, but the idea is that social workers, we see problems that lots of individuals are experiencing. We make these connections from individual stories, and we see that there's something that maybe needs to be changed in the environment. Something at the policy level. Maybe it's just in the community. Maybe it's just that there aren't appropriate services and supports, like transportation services, those kinds of things. And so as a social worker, what we really focus on looking at that person and their environment and figuring out how we can best help not only that individual, but also address the situation, the systemic issue that's causing them to be in distress. Now, to take a little bit of a deeper look into the settlement houses, I want you to watch the video on Whole House in the next slide and think about what it might have been like to live and work in a settlement house. And I want you to contemplate and think about the question, would you prefer to work in a settlement house, or would you prefer to have worked as a caseworker, and why? Now we're going to switch over and think a little bit about some of the common bases of social work practice. And these include professional values, theoretical knowledge, and practice skills. We're going to talk a little bit more about professional values and practice skills in future class sessions. Today we're going to focus on the theoretical knowledge that really helps form the basis and guide our social work practice. Okay, here we've got a point to ponder. So I'd like you to take a few minutes to think about what this quote, "We do not see things as they are. We see things as we are." Think about what it means to you and what it might have to do with social work practice. So take a few minutes, pause this video and write down your answers, and when you're ready, start the video up again. So at all times, we're seeing the world through lenses we may or may not even be aware of. And social work is really about this kind of critical consciousness in our lives, in our institutions, and across society, because such awareness can lead to social change. So in order to shift inherently discriminatory or marginalizing aspects of our society, we really need to think about the assumptions, our views, and the patterns of unconscious ideas that really give shape to these systems and policies that marginalize or oppress others. And we're often not really even aware that we're influenced by some of these assumptions or these beliefs. So we're influenced by our culture, for example. So what does our culture say? Does our culture value money? Does it value competition? Does it value independence? All of these kind of things that society values shape how we as individuals view and see the world. And they do this by really creating norms or kind of our understanding of what's expected of me. So for example, what's expected of me if I'm a female or if I'm a male. We also have the lenses of our identities and our related experiences with those. So our gender, race, our ethnicity, or sexual orientation. And that's not to say that everyone who has the same identifiers sees things exactly the same way. This is just to say that these identifiers often kind of can impact how we see things. And so they often create kind of a common way of looking at things. So for example, as a woman, I'm going to see things in a particular kind of way. I'm going to see things based on how I was brought up, the norms that my values, or that my family, my early education instilled at me, that are the norms of how a girl, a young woman, and a woman should behave and act, the kinds of things, how we should speak and dress and things like that. Those are all ingrained in our society, and they all influence how we see the world. Similarly, we also see things through our own belief system and our value system. As we've discussed, social work has a particular set of values, but you also as an individual have your own set of values. And so one of the things that you'll need to do as you work towards becoming a social worker, or even if you're not going to be a social worker, it's good to explore this idea of what are your values, and where do they match up with, and where do they not match up with social work values. So as individuals, we come in with kind of lenses, ones that we're not even necessarily conscious of, though that's something we'll work on as social workers. Because social work really requires that we become aware of these lenses and acknowledge them and explore how they influence not only our lives, but how they influence our practice. So how do my values, my experiences, shape how I might work with a male? How do they shape how I might work with someone who speaks another language or who's from another country, who has a different culture? All of these things are things that we have to critically reflect on as social workers. So, for example, in a practice setting, I may be working with a client, and I may have a really strong reaction to something that they say or something that they do. And as a social worker, I really have to take a step back and think about why I had that reaction. What is it from my experiences, my beliefs, that caused me to have such a strong reaction? Because as social workers, we don't really want to put our own baggage on the people that we work with, right? And so in order to do that, we have to think consciously through our own issues. We have to have a lot of self-reflection and think about what we believe, why we believe them, why somebody who says something triggers us, in order to really be able to practice and work as well as we can with individual clients. Similarly, it's really easy as social workers to say, oh, that person's dealing with that issue. Well, I've dealt with that before, and this is how I dealt with it, so that should work for them. Well, as social workers, we can't do that because we know that everybody's situation and experiences are different and unique. And so instead, we have to draw from our knowledge base in terms of theories and in terms of evidence-based practices, as well as what the client's telling us to really determine what is the best approach to working with this individual. So I want to talk a little bit more about the social work knowledge base. In particular, we're going to talk a little bit about theories. And it's important to remember that as social work as a profession has developed, we've gone from being friendly visitors with the charitable organizations to really becoming more focused and, albeit, I'll say it, professional social workers. So we've developed our profession to be really guided by evidence-based practice and proven theories that tell us about and help us understand human behavior. So we're going to talk a little bit about theory and how it helps support practice. Now, you'll have a whole two more classes on this if you continue in the social work major. So we're not going to be going into a ton of depth about a lot of theories, but I think it's important for you to make connections here at the beginning. So a theory is a set of propositions derived from and supported by established evidence. So it's not what it sounds like. It's not just that somebody saw something and said, oh, well, I can explain it by X or Y or Z. Instead, theories are based on pretty rigorous research. So there's evidence behind it, and social work uses a whole lot of different theories to really support the choices that we make in practice. So the purposes of theory are as follows. First, to explain and predict human behavior from micro to meso to macro level practice. And there are all kinds of theories that focus on human behavior at each of these levels. In the next class, we're going to look at ecosystems and systems theory as an example. But know that there's a whole range of theories that are available to you if you want to explore this further. Next, theory helps us to explain and predict the impact of larger social structures on human behavior. So theories let us think about how systems, how things may influence or shape individual behavior. So as we think again next week when we do these examples of systems theory, how do things in our environments shape how we behave? They help explain and predict social problems. And there are particular theories that will help to explain different kinds of social problems or social issues. So there are a whole set of conflict theories that help us to understand and explore racism, sexism, heterosexism, ableism. These theories really give us a lens to understanding how our systems and how our society oppresses and marginalizes populations. Next, they also help to guide social work practice. So as we kind of talked about, as social workers, we use these theories. We may use them in an inductive approach, so we may take a particular example with a client or a group of clients, and we may draw from a theory to think about how we can understand their behaviors. So for example, if we're working with kids, we may draw from attachment theory and look at whether or not the behaviors and the distress that they're exhibiting are due to dysfunctions with attachment to their mothers. Okay. Our policies also help to inform social policy. And so, for example, when we're developing policy, we often try to think about the unintended consequences. So who may be left out or who may be unintentionally harmed from the development of these policies. And we use theory, particularly, we might look at an ecosystems. How would this theory impact our rural communities? How would this policy affect poor, disenfranchised communities? And we also use theory to guide social work research. And so as a social work researcher, for example, I may actually try to test a theory. So I may say, pick a theory that has been used and has evidence for a particular population, and I want to test if those key tenets or those key ideas in that theory hold true for my totally different population. We also may use theory a little bit more loosely as researchers. We may actually use it to help us develop our research questions. So for example, I may draw on life course theory as a researcher to suggest that there are key kind of transition points in the life course that may influence the way that my participants in my study react. So for example, when they develop a disability, life course perspective kind of helps me think about what might be the impacts on the individual now and down the road due to the development of a disability at a certain stage in life. Okay, it's also really important to understand that social work hasn't developed in isolation. We aren't just creating knowledge by ourselves, removed from other fields of practice. As social workers, the profession has really drawn from other fields, and within our practice, we draw from these fields as well to help us think through situations and issues. So for example, from psychology, and this scientific study of the mind and behavior, we draw from a lot of theories in psychology around cognitive behavior and things like that, and those we often use to help in our micro practice with individuals. We might draw from political science and the study of political and governmental structures and functions. We may draw from ideas in political science or theories to help inform our kind of meso-level practice with families and groups. And we may draw even from the biology, for example. Um, we're going to talk more about ecosystems theory in a later class, next class. And so we actually draw from biology and the idea of ecological systems and the interconnectedness of species to help guide our practice as social workers. And again, this isn't to say that social work doesn't have anything to contribute or that we don't have our own kind of knowledge base that we add to this. Over this century, as social work has progressed, we've developed a lot of knowledge and skills and values that really help particularly social workers not only use these theories from other fields, but we've developed kind of this unique knowledge base, unique to social work. So particularly, how we relate to individuals, how we employ and work with groups and organizations. Those are kind of key skills and a key knowledge base that social work has developed within our profession. So as you can see from the previous slide, social work is kind of a unique profession in that we draw from a lot of different fields, particularly fields that are less applied, and we take those theories, we take those ideas, and we actually apply them and put them into practice. So now that you're familiar with what a theory is, I want to put that in a little bit more context. So theory helps us in a lot of ways, and one of which is that it drives the direct choices that we make. And I just want to make a distinction between a perspective, theory, and a practice model for you to help just kind of contextualize this a little bit more. So a perspective is a way of perceiving the world, a value position, an emphasis, and it supports the choice of a theory or a model. So it's more broad than a theory. So for example, the strengths perspective, which we talked about in the previous class. As we said, why we do what we do, a big reason for that is because we believe in the strengths of individuals and communities. The strengths perspective is kind of a value base for us. And so when we are using a strengths-based approach or we're using a strengths-based lens, we're going to choose theories and models that tend to fit with that. So for example, strengths perspective and empowerment theory often go hand in hand. As social workers, we might often use the terms almost synonymously, that or when we say we're an empowerment social worker, we use empowerment theory. Often the strengths perspective is incorporated into that. Because again, it's this big kind of umbrella picture. It's this big idea that people have value and worth and are capable. Right? And we've gone over now, again, what a theory is. But let's talk a little bit more about what a practice model is. So a practice model is a blueprint for action. It's a problem-solving device, and so it really operationalizes a theory. It's our how-to. So an example might be a solution-focused practice model. So a solution-focused practice model is connected with the strengths perspective. And it's this idea that people have strengths and abilities, and instead of looking at all the deficits, all the things that's gone wrong, we're going to take what we're working with and focus on solutions, focus on options. So it's a very empowerment, very strengths-based approach to practice. Now, as a social worker, there are so many theories that you can choose from that really can inform and guide your practice. Depending on the type of client you're working with, whatever issue you're working on, there are many theories that you can draw from. We've got these psychoanalytic theories, and even though social work kind of moved away from the psychoanalytic movement, we still draw on some of those theories to help us understand what an individual is experiencing. We may If we're working with children, we may draw from development and psychosocial development theories. We're working with kids in school, we may look at behavioral learning. We may look at classical conditioning or operant conditioning. So these are, giving a child reward or setting up a context that supports and reinforces positive behavior. We may also draw from biological theories, such as attachment theory, which I mentioned earlier. Again, we may draw on ecology and ecological theory, which we're going to discuss next week. There are a number of cognitive theories that we may draw from. So again, you get the idea that social work, we aren't dogmatic in our approach to practice or in our approach to theories. We recognize that there are many theories that can help us understand the complex realities of our clients. And so we, as social workers and as generalist social workers, really have this huge knowledge base at our disposal. So that concludes this week's class. Up next, you're going to want to complete the Choose Your Own Adventure activity. And next week, you're going to want to work through eClass 3, and you're going to want to work through the Social Works Stance activity. Again, if you have any questions as you're working through these and other activities, please let me know.